Welcome back to Shadow House The Gathering. Today I'm going to be reading chapters 21, 22, and 23. Yesterday we found out that it seems like the house is not letting the students escape, and that Azumi has still been missing after following that nylon ribbon down the hallway. So I'm excited to see what happens next. Chapter 21. Azumi had been following the pink nylon ribbon down the dark and twisted corridor for so long she almost expected to arrive back at the starting point. But she kept going and going, wandering around corners, stumbling up and down steps, without even crossing the paths she'd already walked. How big is this place? Azumi wondered. The ribbon was starting to feel like a safety line back to the way out. The hallway stretched about 100 yards farther before coming to another T-shaped crossing. With her phone's flashlight, Azumi could see the nylon ribbon veer around the corner to the right. She listened to her breath, counting in her head with every exhalation so that she had something to focus on other than the growing strangeness of the situation. Azumi didn't see the backpack on the floor until her sneaker caught on the strap and she tripped, letting go of the ribbon and landing sprawled on the floor. Her hand trembled as she reached for the backpack. Its blue canvas was faded, if it had been bleached by the elements. Its front pockets had been worn through and the sides were ragged, as if torn open by hungry animals. Inside, Azumi could see what she knew were stacks of notebooks, once waterlogged, but now dry. She knew that if she were to reach in, pull out one of the books, and open it to any page, she'd see ink that had bled into gray splotches, words that had been leached away by water. Azumi kicked the bag away hard, and it arced away from her and hit a distant wall with a satisfying smack. This backpack had been one of the first objects that she and Moriko had stumbled upon in the forest behind Auntie Wakame's house in Yamanashi Prefecture. And here it was, waiting in Larkspur for Azumi to find it again. Something shifted down the hallway. There was a scuffling of feet. "Who's there?" Azumi demanded. "What is going on here?" She grabbed her phone and shone the light into the shadows. A few more objects were scattered throughout the hall in the darkness ahead of her, but from where she sat, Azumi couldn't make out what they were. She stood slowly, waiting for the scuffling sound to come again, but the hallway was quiet. Following the ribbon, she made her way to the next object. It was a wrinkled photograph, its subject staring up at Azumi. She knew this one, too. It was a snapshot of a father standing with his daughter on the corner of a busy street, his arms slung around her neck, both of them smiling for the camera. Azumi knew it was taken in Tokyo. She also knew that if she were to flip over the photograph, she'd find kanji written on the back in ballpoint pen. "Goodbye, my lovely girl. Forgive me." Azumi's Japanese wasn't nearly as good as her parents wanted it to be, but she'd studied this photograph before, too, in the forest on the day Moriko went missing. With every discovery, she felt herself growing giddy, as if she might lose control and start laughing again, like she had done with Marcus in the laundry. She pulled her jacket tight across her middle and forced the feeling away, determined to keep hold of herself. Azumi remembered the time last year when Moriko had tried to pierce her belly button with a sewing needle. Azumi had run to tell her parents what her sister was about to do. They'd laughed, and Azumi had fumed. "It's going to get infected," she'd insisted. "So then let it get infected," her father had said. "Your sister will learn, won't she?" Let it get infected. That was the thought that had gone through Azumi's head when she headed back to Auntie Wakame's cottage on that last afternoon. Those were the words she thought of as the sun had set and she'd held her tongue about leaving Moriko alone on the path at the edge of the woods, holding on to that stupid pink ribbon. Your sister will learn, won't she? Azumi had no idea at the time how that infection would spread, how it would sneak into her brain like a worm, turn her into a mindless zombie, and walk her unknowingly into the darkness of her dreams. Coming to the end of the hallway, Azumi ran around the corner, following the ribbon. There was light up ahead coming from a doorway on the right. Pieces of paper were strewn like breadcrumbs all the way into the distance. Azumi ventured on, bending down to examine these pages. Picking up several of them, she noticed that the same words were written in pencil at the top of each. Dear sister. Someone was toying with her, with all of them. The creepy paper mache figurines that looked like the group of kids she'd met that day, and now the ribbons and things from the woods here in the house. She picked up another page. This one was different. The words, Dear Azumi, were followed by a series of thick black lines, magic marker inked over the rest of the message. Azumi looked closer. Holding the flashlight in just the right position, she was able to make out indentations in the paper, more of the message that someone had tried to erase. Dear Azumi, I miss you so much. If only we could see each other face to face. A spark of anger lit in her stomach, and she had to stop herself from crumpling the page. Someone had mimicked Moriko's writing perfectly. Who would make fun of her sister like this? She hadn't told anyone about Moriko besides Marcus. Was this the type of joke that he'd try, to get back at her for whatever dumb thing she might have said earlier to offend him? A muffled cough echoed up from up ahead. A figure was standing in the pale light, filtering through a doorway, holding the end of the pink ribbon. Azumi squinted. Hello? The figure didn't answer her, didn't move. Trying to keep herself from trembling, Azumi approached steadily. Did you write this? Azumi found herself fighting tears. Answer me! She didn't know what emotion she was feeling. They were all so mixed up. She thought of the day weeks prior when she'd searched online for East Coast schools and how only one entry kept coming up. Larkspur. Was this person responsible for that too? It didn't seem possible. Not physically, not emotionally. She'd never imagined that someone could be so cruel. She was about to tear the papers to pieces, but the figure stepped into the faint beam of her flashlight, and Azumi's breath was swept from her lungs. Moriko? Azumi wheezed. Her face was on fire, her skin tingled, and then the hallway tilted, or maybe it only seemed so. The figure stepped back into the shadows, the details of her appearance melting away. She dropped the end of the ribbon and then disappeared through the doorway on her right. Moriko, wait! Azumi called out. She raced after her sister. There's a letter on this side. It says, Dear sister, I miss you so much. If only we could see each other face to face, I know I would finally find the comfort I've needed this past year. I know you would explain everything to me, tell me why you haven't come to find me. I can't remember what happened anymore. One minute you were right beside me, and the next second I couldn't see you. Did the director talk to you too? Why haven't I heard from you? Have you gotten my letters? Have I even sent them, or is this just a cruel trick of my imagination, telling me that I've been waiting and waiting to hear from you when you have no idea where I am? Chapter 22. Hey, over here, Dash called from up ahead. He and Dylan were standing in front of a large wooden door on the right side of the corridor. Maybe this one leads to an exit. The top of the door rose high over their heads, crowned in a sunburst-shaped arc. Marcus and Poppy approached the twins and the door cautiously. Dylan was already pulling at the doorknob. I don't think so, said Marcus. Look. Dylan hadn't noticed the dozen or more rusty nails that had been hammered along the outer edge of the door, piercing the frame around it. Frustrated, Dash pushed his brother's hands away from the knob. It looks like someone wants to keep people out of there. Either that, said Poppy, or they want to keep someone inside. Dash closed his eyes, and Poppy realized that she should try harder to not frighten her new friends. Friends? Was that what they'd become? Despite the animosity she'd already felt building between herself and both Dylan and Marcus, she had to admit that Dash was feeling like a friend. I'm sorry, Dash, she said. It was hard for her to say. The girls at Thursday's Hope hardly ever apologized unless Miss Tate threatened them with punishment. Listen, Dylan whispered. He brought his ear close to the door but didn't touch it. The others decided they could hear just fine from where they stood. A slight scratching sound was coming from within, like long fingernails dragging along the wood. Dylan glanced at the others. Do you think it's Azumi? None of them wanted to call out or make their presence known. What if it is? Poppy asked. We'd need a hammer to pry those nails away. We could go look for one, said Marcus, but nobody appeared willing to head back into the dark passage behind them. The doorknob rattled violently and everyone jumped back. There was a sudden pounding, and the door itself jounced and trembled. It bulged outward, and the nails in the door frame strained. Dash whimpered. They were all too frightened to move, too scared to speak. But Dash knew they were all thinking the same thing as he was. One of the masked kids is in there, and he or she is trying to get us. Then, as suddenly as the pounding started, it stopped. The scratching, too. The hallway was filled with a quiet that seemed to ring in their eardrums like a long and steady hum. No one dared to breathe, which was strange because all of a sudden the echo of a stifled inhalation interrupted the silence like a knife. Marcus, Dylan whispered, his eyes round with terror. Someone is standing behind you. Chapter 23. Everyone turned to look. Down the wide hallway, several yards past the door with the nails, a boy was staring back at them. Or at least he appeared to be staring. It was difficult to tell because of his mask. This one was shaped like a dog's head, its lips drawn all the way back to the boy's ears. He had shaggy blondish hair and was dressed similarly to the others they had seen that day. Stiff flannel pants, a white shirt, and a gray sweater. Who are you? Marcus yelled. What do you want? The boy in the dog mask stepped closer to Marcus, nodding as if taunting him. He was clutching a broken violin, holding the jagged body of the instrument in one hand. The neck dangled by the strings, swaying against the boy's leg like a metronome. He's just trying to scare us, said Dylan, stepping toward the boy. Dash reached out to pull him back, but Dylan shook off his grip. Not a good idea, kid. Back up. Dylan, shut your mouth, Dash pleaded through clenched teeth. Marcus, Poppy whispered, you're too close. The boy in the mask slowly turned his head as if to acknowledge everyone's presence. Then all at once he swung the body of the violin forward. It smacked Marcus in the face so hard that he fell to the floor. Before anyone else could move, the masked boy hurled himself forward and pounced on Marcus, straddling his chest and stretching the strings of the broken violin across his neck to cut off his breath. Marcus's eyes went wide and he let out a strangled scream. Stop that! Dash shouted. Get off him! He bolted forward, barreling into the attacker's side. The boy in the dog mask barely flinched, and Dash fell to the floor. Whoa, said Dylan. You are so done. He charged, but he was too slow. With a slight feint, the boy twisted his body out of the way. He lifted his knee like a piston and brought it down on Dash's neck, pinning him beside Marcus. Dylan was too shocked to move. Dylan! Dash wheezed. Leave him alone, shouted Poppy, throwing off her shock and flying into the fray. She yanked at the strings that were cutting into Marcus's throat. Dylan tried to kick out the boy's knee, but the boy swiveled out of the way. Dylan, watch it, yelled Poppy. The boy hissed at Dylan, flinching as Dylan swung his fist toward his head. Poppy shoved hard at the masked boy's shoulder, and Dash managed to twist his torso and then scramble out from under him. Marcus reached up from where he was flailing on the floor. Get off of us, he gurgled, attempting to clutch at the boy's clothing to drag him off balance. Dylan came forward again, fist raised. He reached out and tried to grab the boy's sweater, but his hand seemed to slip right through it. The boy looked up, and the dog mask seemed to change, the eyes growing wider, the upper lip curling back in a snarl, revealing yellow plastic teeth. He bolted to his feet and then cringed, as if he were startled by Dylan's attempt to touch him. There was a great booming sound, followed by a resounding crack. The building shook, and from somewhere far away came a noise like a roar. The boy scuttled from the group, rolling toward the door with the nails, dragging his broken violin across the rug, cowering. Marcus sat up, gasping and choking. The four kids retreated to the center of the hallway. They watched the boy in horror, their muscles coiled like springs. But the boy was fixated on the wall behind them. Turning, they discovered a wide, jagged opening staring back. It hadn't been there moments earlier. The booming sound, the cracking noise, the roar, The house had changed shape around them again. At the far end of this dark and dusty passageway, a light blinked on, a small chandelier globe in the ceiling of a brass elevator cage. The boy in the dog mask groaned and shifted against the far wall. He clutched his broken violin close to his chest and was watching them intently now, as if he'd forgotten the fear that had distracted him from his anger. Deep in his esophagus, his voice rattled wordlessly. "Rrrr." Dash jumped to his feet, clutching at his throat. He struggled to catch his breath. "We need to get away from here." He pulled at Marcus's shirt collar and yanked at Poppy's shoulder. They kept their eyes on the boy as they backed through the new opening in the wall. Moving swiftly into the dank space, the group put about a dozen feet between themselves and their attacker. "Come on!" The boy in the mask rose to his feet, his knees slightly bent, as though he were about to pounce again. "This way," Marcus whispered, turning to face the dim light in the elevator car. His vocal cords were raw. "Everyone run," said Dash. "Now!" Dash and Poppy raced ahead of Marcus and Dylan. Dylan supported Marcus with his shoulder and helped him down the new corridor. "Thank you," said Marcus. "Just move," said Dylan. Marcus could hear the dog boy catching up quickly, but he kept the elevator's glow in the center of his vision. If there were walls around him, they were made of shadow. The house seemed to shiver, the floor rattling, the ceiling creaking, as if the passage were stretching longer and longer behind him. He hoped that whatever was happening would buy them a few extra seconds to get farther ahead of the kid in the dog mask. Something flew from the darkness to the left of the elevator and collided with the group. Dash and Marcus shouted in surprise as Poppy and Dylan were spun around to face the direction from which they'd just come. Dazed, Marcus noticed that the boy in the dog mask was only several yards away, limping toward them determinedly. "Poppy!" said an excited, high-pitched voice. "Oh my goodness!" The thing that had barreled into them was Azumi. The glow from the elevator's lamp lit her panicked expression. "Please help me!" Azumi glanced over her shoulder, looking back from where she'd come. "There's this crazy girl chasing me." "In here," said Poppy, sliding the cage door open with a crash before stepping inside. "Quickly!" The others followed. The space, which had seemed tight at first, expanded to fit everyone. The others huddled by the rear wall as Poppy shoved the handle. Accordion-like springs squealed their resistance, and the cage door closed. A body smashed into the car from outside, rattling the brass gates. The old, cracking plastic of the dog mask pressed through the diamond-shaped holes in the cage. The boy reached inside, swinging his hands like claws in an arcade game, hoping to catch a prize. Poppy knew it was only a matter of time before the boy grabbed the latch and swung the door open. Her mouth was dry. Her head felt like it was screwed on loosely. She understood she had to focus or she'd collapse. Staying to the side of the car, she looked for a panel of buttons that would send the elevator up or down. But there were no buttons. Instead, there was a circular apparatus marked with the word Otis across the front, a small black knob sticking out of its top. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to herself. "I don't know what to do." "Get back or you're going to lose an arm when this thing moves," Dylan shouted, taunting the boy. Dash clung to his shoulder, shaking. Azumi shouldered past them, pushing at the attacker's hands while dodging his violent swings. "Azumi, what are you doing?" Poppy asked. "Be careful." Marcus stayed pressed against the wall, rubbing his neck, wiping at his eyes, and clearing his throat. "Poppy, make this thing move." Okay. Poppy grabbed the black knob, sliding it to the right. To Poppy's surprise, the car lurched, its gears squealing sharply, and then the elevator began to rise. The dog boy yanked his arms out of the cage and howled, a monstrous, inhuman sound coming from behind his mask, before disappearing into the shadows. And that's the end of chapter 23. Please tune in tomorrow to find out what happens next. Have a good night.